Jim Crow laws, how America legalized racism for decades. Before I Have a Dream, before Rosa sat down, and long before Martin marched, America lived under a different kind of law. A law that wasn't written in justice, but in hate. A system so twisted it turned racism into routine. It was called Jim Crow. The birth of Jim Crow. The Civil War ended in 1865. The South lay in ruins. Slavery was abolished, and 4 million newly freed Black Americans stood at the crossroads of hope and horror. For a brief moment, the light seemed real. Black men were elected to Congress. Freedmen's schools rose across the South. Churches became centers of learning, pride, and progress, but the flame scared those who once held the whip. They wanted the old world back, and they found a way. In 1877, the federal troops left the South, and when they did, a new kind of slavery was born. Not with chains this time, but with laws. They called them Jim Crow laws, a name taken from a racist minstrel character, a white man, painted in blackface, mocking black life on stage. That name became a symbol. And from the 1880s to the 1960s, it ruled the land. Segregation by design. Jim Crow wasn't just about separation. It was about control. Signs were everywhere. White only and colored. Different schools, buses, water fountains, hospitals, cemeteries. Even the Bibles used to swear, and witnesses in court were segregated. Black children learned early. You could go to the zoo, but not on the same day as white children. You could walk into a restaurant, but not through the front door. You could fight for your country, but not sit next to your commander. This was normal life under Jim Crow, a world built to remind Black Americans that freedom didn't mean equality. Unknown. Truth number 1, Jim Crow. Wasn't just a Southern thing. Here's a truth they don't often teach. Jim Crow didn't stop at the Mason-Dixon line. From Chicago to New York, segregation laws crept quietly north. Housing covenants banned Black families from certain neighborhoods. Banks refused loans through redlining policies. Schools were technically open, but practically divided. Even northern cities like Detroit and Boston had unwritten rules that kept Black people out of certain parks, restaurants, and jobs. Jim Crow wasn't just Southern law, it was an American habit, the violence behind the laws. But laws alone couldn't hold the system together. Fear did. Every Black person in the South knew what could happen if they stepped out of line. From 1882 to 1968, over 4,700 lynchings were recorded. Most were public, carnival-like events with photographs and postcards sold as souvenirs. The message was clear. Obey Jim Crow, or die trying not to. And yet, through that terror, Black Americans built something unbreakable. Communities that resisted, churches that preached courage, schools that taught children to dream bigger than the walls around them, even under oppression. The spirit of resistance refused to die. Unknown. Truth number 2. The U.S. military was segregated too. During World Wars I and II, Black soldiers fought for freedom abroad while being denied it at home. In World War II, the U.S. Army kept blood donations segregated by race. Imagine that. You could die beside a white soldier, but your blood couldn't mix. It wasn't until 1948 that President Truman signed an order to integrate the military. 83 years after slavery ended, the Hidden Heroes narrator. Every system of oppression creates rebels. And the Jim Crow era birthed giants, Ida B. Wells, who risked her life exposing lynchings. Thurgood Marshall, who took Jim Crow to court and broke it piece by piece. Claudette Colvin, a 15-year-old girl who refused to give up her seat months before Rosa Parks. They didn't wait for permission to be human. They demanded it, and they paid for it. Unknown truth. 3. Black voters were erased by design. After the 15th Amendment granted Black men the right to vote, Southern lawmakers went to work. They created poll taxes, literacy tests, and grandfather clauses. meaning if your grandfather couldn't vote, neither could you. Election days came with violence and intimidation. Entire black communities were purged from voter rolls. By 1940, only 3% of eligible black Southerners were registered to vote. Democracy in the land of the free had a color line. The courts joined the fight. But by the mid-20th century, cracks began to show. Black lawyers, educators, and activists used the system that oppressed them to fight back. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled in Brown v. Board of Education that segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. The walls of Jim Crow began to tremble. But make no mistake, paper laws didn't end the hatred overnight. Schools dragged their feet. Governors shouted, "Segregation forever!" and mobs greeted little black children with rocks, spit, and fire. Freedom, it turned out, had a long waiting list. Unknown. Truth number 4. Jim Crow inspired Nazi Germany. Here's one of the darkest truths. When Hitler's Germany was writing its racial laws, Nazi lawyers actually studied the Jim Crow system in the United States. They examined how America classified races, restricted marriage, and created separate but equal systems. The Nazis called it useful. The very blueprint for racial segregation in the U.S. influenced one of history's greatest evils. That's how deep Jim Crow's poison ran. The fall of Jim Crow, by the 1960s, the pressure became unstoppable. Rosa Parks's quiet defiance lit a movement. Dr. King's voice turned into a thunder that shook Washington. And the Civil Rights Act of 1964 finally outlawed segregation. A year later, the Voting Rights Act followed. Jim Crow was on paper dead, but in truth, systems don't die, they evolve. They wear new names: mass incarceration, redlining, police profiling, different mask. Same disease, unknown. Truth number 5, Jim Crow still echoes today. Think Jim Crow is history? Look again, schools are still divided by zip codes. Wealth gaps trace the same red lines drawn decades ago. And black Americans are still disproportionately jailed, surveilled, and denied opportunities. Jim Crow may be gone in law, but he still lives in the shadows. In policies, in silence, in the places people pretend not to see. Legacy of resistance. But history isn't just pain, it's proof. Proof that a people can be broken but not destroyed. That even when the law is against you, justice can still be born from courage. The children of Jim Crow became the builders of a new America, and their legacy is a reminder to every generation that equality must be defended, not once, but always. Jim Crow was built to last forever, but forever met its match, in faith, in fire, in the unshakable belief that freedom is worth fighting for. The story of Jim Crow isn't ancient history, it's a mirror. And what we do next is what defines us. If this story opened your eyes, don't let it stop here. Hit that like button, subscribe for more hidden truths, and share this video because history only repeats when we forget. This is Untold Black Legacies, and we will keep telling the stories the world tried to erase